Wolfe Glick, aka Incinerates #1 fan, is one of the best, if not the best, Pokemon VGC player out there. I got in touch with his videos some years back when the Pokemon nostalgia hit me, and I fell in love with a lot of his videos, especially his tournament coverage videos. I loved how he went through, like, step by step, his thought process for picking specific Pokemon, and also the round by round game analysis. And watching all these videos, I just kept wondering, how good would Wolfe fare in chess? And I mean, that question was answered in PogChamps 6, where he was part of the lineup. And I mean, he did extremely well. I mean, he performed just as well, if not better. I mean, concerning the time frame given to him to learn the game, he performed as well as I would have thought, if not better, because he was 1300 rated by the time the tournament started, and that was just what I expected, because he really sounds smart, right? Especially when he speaks about Pokemon. So I just wanted us to take a look at some of the games that he played. I mean, he absolutely dominated, but then we'll look at the one game where he lost, the reason why he did not qualify for, I think, the semifinals or the finals. And yeah, let's get into the video. So the first game is between Wolfe and Hungry Box, and he starts with e4. Sorry, I gotta click the screen here. e4, we have e5, knight f3, knight f6, knight c3, knight c6, and here Wolfe shocks me. He plays the move d4, which is very active and kind of hints of him being an aggressive player, and that's contrary to what I would think that Wolfe would be. Now, if you know anything about Wolfe, he is well noted for his Perish Trap team, and that always struck me as a kind of strategic thing, because first of all, you have to use the Perish song and prevent your opponents from switching their Pokemon for about 4 turns before they faint, right? So it's more of a very calculative kind of team. Again, maybe it is an aggressive type of team. I'm not a Pokemon expert, but I really expected him to be more positional. But him playing in an aggressive style really took me by surprise. So this d4 move is not something I often encourage. It's not a bad move, but when leaving things in the balance is not the kind of play I would want you to play at this stage. But he does well, and his opponent ultimately doesn't even understand what goes on here and plays d5, which is really going to spell disaster for him very quickly, because we have d takes e5, we have d takes e4. Wolfe intelligently trades off. Of course, you can take with the knight to prevent losing castling, but he takes with the queen, and because the queens are absent from the board, the king being in the center is not that big of a deal as it normally would be. Then we have Wolfe takes the knight, and over here I think his opponent gets scared because this coming in is a fork, that instead of just capturing back, he captures the pawn, and that just puts Wolfe a whole pawn up, a whole piece up. And one advice I would give for Wolfe is that mostly when he gets into these winning positions, he's very aggressive. If you're up in material, the easiest way to win is to trade down. And mostly when he got up in material, he was still just uber focused on attacking. You could just trade down and then you have one extra piece than your opponent in the end game. Imagine I have 5 cupcakes and you have 4. If we keep eating them down, it gets to a point in time you envy the one that I have, right? Okay, so now knight takes e4. We have bishop to b4, check. Patsa takes a check, Patsa gives a check. But of course, he's developing with tempo, so it's not bad. We have bishop to d2, bishop to f5, bishop takes, and not panicking or just moving the bishop straight away. And hanging this, he smartly just castles queenside with a check. King moves, and then he brings the bishop here, targeting the weak pawn. Positionally speaking, you could just come back and try and hold the king in the center, but this move is ultimately fine. We have b5, bishop takes, attacking the rook runs away, and now bishop takes b5. White is just simply dominating here, and Wolfe does very good aggressive active play in this over here. We have a6, he keeps the pin. The rook moves, targeting this hanging pawn. I mean, what else? We have rook h to e1, absolutely pinning the bishop to the king. In this position, this bishop is completely gone. There's nothing to be said about it. The rook takes, check. The bishop can't take because it's pinned. He takes the rook. His opponent takes the pawn because I'm sure he's thinking he wins the knight. But ultimately, he misses the fact that this is a back spanker. And Wolfe wins this game. Very, very nice dominant game. Of course, there's a rating disparity, but a very nice game. Don't worry, as the games go on, we'll be getting higher rated player, which is why I didn't comment so much on this game. The next game is against Filian, the VTuber. And in this game, Wolfe shows very good ability to attack weaknesses. So we have e3. His opponent starts very passive here, right? Anytime your opponent pushes the pawn just one square, it's a very passive way to begin. And Wolfe responds well. He goes e5, taking over the center. If your opponent gives you the center, you take the center. d3, still playing passively. d5, and passive doesn't mean bad. Okay, passive doesn't mean bad. I used to be a passive player, but passive doesn't mean bad. I used to play the hedgehog, if you understand what I mean. Knight to e2, knight to c6, knight to g3, knight to f6, knight to d2, and then d4. So here it's more of a positional thing. You could still try and gain control over the center. Now, you know, in chess, he who controls the center controls the game. Wolfe has very good control over the center, and he could like expand that control with moves like, let's say, bishop here. I mean, if you could get the bishop here, that's a dream position. He could do that, and that would, I mean, ultimately help him. But this move, I don't get why he did it. It first of all, it opens up like this square for the knight to develop. This knight is very bad where it is, and the knight can't really make any active plays simply because your pawn prevents it from making that kind of play. So by playing this move, you give your opponent access into that square. I get like cramping your opponent, like trying to take away space from your opponent, which is the style I actually expect Wolfe to be playing. But here it doesn't like really help out. It's not a bad move, doesn't lose the game, but then you give your opponent activity, and when your opponent lacks activity, you don't want to help them in that regard. So here we have takes, and we have bishop to e2, bishop to d6, knight g to e4, knight takes e4, and here's opponent had a very good opportunity to just play this, and now you can even see how annoying this knight is, especially if you can even trade off the bishops. It's now like white is not as bad as white should be, though I still give the position to black. White is not as good as he could be, right? Which is why ultimately d4 is not what you want to go for. But here's opponent captures wrongly. Not all captures are equal. He captures with the pawn, keeping the knight further back and still ceding control of the center to Wolfe. And Wolfe is like, okay, I'll take it. He castles in this position. His opponent castles as well, and then he develops the rook, targeting this pawn. Not really, but it's just a very good idea that you want to get your rooks into the center of the board. And I mean, especially where you have a semi-opened or an open file. The files are determined by the pawns on it. If both players have a pawn on the file, it's a closed file. If just one player has pawns on the file, it's a semi-open file. And if there are no pawns on the file, it's an open file. So this is a very good semi-open file for black to use. And Wolfe takes over considerably, and his opponent like really misunderstands what's going on here and plays the move f3. Now f3 stands for forget about it. You just never touch this pawn. Rarely do you ever touch this pawn. Why? Because you create this weakness in the diagonal that your opponent can attack. And second, I mean, clearly you are just making your king's position weak, your king's castle position weak. Now Wolfe misses a very good move here. He plays bishop to c5, and understandably so. You want to develop with tempo. If you play pawn push and the king stays on this square, it's discovered attack, you win the bishop. So understandably, like it's understandable why he would do that, but he could immediately just go for this, right? You are immediately threatening hell on your opponent, right? For example, you have bishop takes, and the king has to come in here, and then you just get in for like checkmate. Sorry for the lag. Yeah, so he could have done that. It's going to be very difficult for his opponent to defend. Again, if you're also looking at blocking this way, this is well known to be bad. Takes, check, king comes in here, and the rook is just like going to have a field day. I think you want to develop This rook, either one is fine. Or maybe you want to use the queen. You could use the rook or you could use the queen. Maybe bring the queen in here and then bring the rook this way. The reason I'm considering the rook is these two squares can be defended by a single pawn push or by a single move. So you don't want to put the rook on any of these squares, right? Anyways, that is what could have been. But then we have this move. And I mean, good on him for seeing the tactic. The king moves away and then he plays just a very simple move. H6, saving from himself from any back spankers. And I mean, at this point, you can't really tell what to do in this position. So this move is just a very like good practical move to make. Albeit the idea here actually is you want to like come in this way and continue pressing with this guy. I mean, anyways. So we have knight to b3, bishop b6, and his opponent plays c3, which actually helps Wolfe here. One, you now split your pawns. You have isolated pawns in this position. And yeah, you have isolated pawns which your opponent can target in the position. And you've helped your opponent deal with one of his, let's say, nuisance pawns. So, I mean, black is doing very well here. White here plays bishop to b2. And Wolfe plays bishop to e6. And this is something he does a lot, which I think is ultimately what caused him to lose. He's very forward thinking in his chess, right? He's very forward thinking. He rarely ever goes back, right? And what am I trying to say here? Basically, what I'm trying to say is that he's mostly thinking about just activity and not so much. I'm not saying he doesn't, but not so much considering like certain things, right? Because when you're learning chess, mostly when any piece is targeting your queen, right, even if there's something blocking it, you don't want to keep the queen there for the sake of like discovered attacks, right? So I even have this famous saying, when the rook is on the same file as the queen, regardless of how many pieces are in between, you want to let that queen flee, right? Anytime there's that possibility, you want to let the queen out, but Wolfe is just glad and happy to allow it, right? In this position, it's not that big of a deal, but it could be like a big deal if you don't take time, right? So we have bishop to e3. His opponent plays rook to b1, signifying that c4 is coming in. We have rook a to d8 and queen to c2. We have bishop to e3, and I think the point of this is if his opponent, let's just say, makes a random move, for example, his plan might be to trade and to possibly get the rook into this position, which is, I mean, a very nice idea. So I guess that's why he moved the bishop there. Now we finally have the c4 move, opening the discovered attack on the queen, and now he goes for active play on the king side. We have g3, and then here Wolfe plays queen h5, right? You get what I'm saying? Like most people would be like, okay, let's just hide here, right? Because you don't want discovered attack threats on you. Wolfe is like, nah, I'm just gonna put myself there. Of course, I mean, again, it's not that big of a deal because of this, but mostly you kind of like want to watch out for these kinds of ideas, right? We have queen to c3, and Wolfe sees the mistake. He immediately brings his bishop there. Knight takes, queen can't take because I mean, that's a bad trade. The rook comes in, and you could in this position just jump here. Wolfe could have done that, targeting the queen. Queen has to move, and then you take here and you win here, which is very like cool if you want that. But Wolfe here plays c5, which simply holds the knight there, and that's a very good square to hold the knight. We have bishop to d3, f6. Interesting move, possibly just trying to stop the pawn from coming in. We have now bishop to a3, b6 holding the pawn. Wolfe is very active in this position. White isn't really doing much. Okay, I'll speak about white later on. But here we have the move g4, queen h3, bishop to b1, and Wolfe plays knight to e2, targeting the queen. After the queen moves, we have check, which is also a fork. You can't take because the pawn is pinned to the king. After the king moves, we get takes, and activating his piece. It's very active play by Wolfe. He takes with the bishop, defended by the rook, and now he's targeting the queen and the rook. His opponent responds wrongly, developing the queen and we have like queen takes here, right? I'm just here to show Wolfe's dominance. Of course, this is the only time I can ever talk about something that Wolfe does, because I don't really understand Pokemon. But one thing his opponent should have attempted doing long ago is getting the move f4 in the f4, right? f4 is a very nice idea. It opens things up. You can even bring the rook to join in the attack. The bishops are opened up. f4, f5 is a very good consideration that white could have done, or even f4, e5 is a good consideration white could have done. But white just couldn't come up with the plans, and ultimately Wolfe won that. The next game, I don't know the actual name of this player, but his username is Gymnast Steve. And yeah. So Wolfe plays e4 here. We have c6, a Caro-Kann. When your opponent gives you the center, you take the center. So d4, d5, and here Wolfe goes for the advance, which, I mean, it gives the most advantage if you want to play these types of positions. The exchange is pretty boring and leads to like drawish positions. Of course, the player with the most understanding is always going to win in that regard. But here we have e5, the advanced Caro-Kann. Bishop to f5, knight to f3. If I recall, I think the classical or something has like h4, g4, funny moves. Knight to f3, e6, bishop to d3, bishop takes, and c5. c5, mostly what I meet is this is the line I mostly meet. But Wolfe is like, nah, let me just castle. And after the bishop moves in, he goes in check because his opponent misses something, and that's the hanging pawn. We have pawn takes, which I mean, you can play that move, but you shouldn't help your opponent develop, and that's what his opponent ultimately does, right? So he takes, and then now he helps the knight develop, and the knight is threatening some very delicious squares, right? Of course, you can stop it. Like, if you can see the threat ahead of time, you can stop it. It's not that big of a deal, but allowing it is where the problem is, right? Giving your opponent too much options or ways of attacking you is usually not a good idea. And again, we continue to see like Wolfe's consistent like forward motion. He rarely ever goes back, and it can be very detrimental when playing like chess against stronger opponents. If you are only forward minded, you are really going to get spanked a lot, right? Bishop to c5, and then his opponent misses this, so knight to c6. And his opponent further misses this idea because after the knight jumps in, you are just losing the queen. Takes, and then he develops the bishop defending the pawn. Very good. Castles kingside, knight to c3, just developing. Very good. We have bishop to b6, and rook f to e1, rook f to e8. And here, I don't know if black actually planned this. Now, when you are sometimes losing, and you're on the defensive, right? You become highly intuitive. Right, you begin to like really calculate like equal to your level, right? You really begin to calculate very well for your level. Mostly when everything is on the board, you are just very quick, you just play fast. But when you realize that you are losing, you become uber focused and you play very well for your level, right? If not slightly above your level, right? So his opponent, I don't know if he plans this, but this whole set of moves helps him trap Wolfe's bishop. But Wolfe doesn't see it. In this position, this is a very good time for Wolfe to play the move queen to a6, right? Very good time to play queen to a6 and bring your queen back, and you can now launch an attack on your opponent. Again, like I said, backward moves. But Wolfe plays bishop to g5, which is not a bad move. Funny enough, when I looked at the engine preferred this move to what I'm saying. But like at the beginner level, these types of ideas is like, this is how you want to play safe. But yeah, this is what he plays. And after knight here, the queen cannot run away. The queen has no escape squares, right? And that's like crazy interesting, right? So, I mean, the best move here is to go queen takes, and after rook takes, you take here. This is a fork, and ultimately, like I mentioned in the first game, if you are up in material, you want to trade down, right? Because now you have 3, your opponent has 2. Your aim should be to trade down because that ultimately wins you the game. Unfortunately, Wolfe doesn't go for this variation and instead goes bishop takes first, and after knight takes, bishop takes, knight takes. We have equal material, equal quantity of material, but not equal quality of material, in that for the rook, his opponent has a knight, right? Okay, so now the knight develops. We have a3, controlling move, preventing the knight from stepping further into the position. We have a6, the knight jumps into a4, targeting the bishop. Bishop moves into c7, targeting the e5 pawn. Wolfe ignores that completely, and his opponent captures. He develops the knight further into the opponent's position. We have the rook up. He now finally doubles up his rooks. And here we just see a lot of sort of maneuvering. But unfortunately here, Wolfe misses a very good tactic. If you are very sharp, you can think about this tactic for like 3 seconds, 5 seconds. I'll wait. And if you saw, the tactic is basically rook takes, because if you take, you're going to get back spanked, right? So he missed that. I mean, completely fine. We have rook to d4, bishop to b6, b4, knight takes. Now he attacks the knight moves, he defends the pawn. His opponent continues pushing forward, not paying regard to the fact that these guys are not really well defended. We have rook takes, bishop takes, rook takes, bishop takes, rook takes. And you'd be like, wait, didn't he just mess up here? Right? Like, didn't he just mess up here? No, he didn't, because after bishop takes, rook takes, you are threatening checkmate. So your opponent has to respond to that. And then we have this position. So yeah, this is just a completely winning position. If you want to understand why this is completely winning, first of all, 1, I have a rook, 2, you have a bishop. Sorry, 1, I have a rook, 2, you have one I have a rook and you have a bishop. 2, I have 2 connected passed pawns, right? This king can never stop these 2 pawns. So a funny thing you could do here, if you want to like throw your opponent, is trade the rook for the bishop. Just trade them. Your opponent would have to waddle his king all the way to these pawns. And let's say the king even got to this position. He can never take this pawn because this pawn is simply just going to promote. Right? So the king is just going to be stuck here in between these 2 pawns. And your king and your pawns are going to wreak havoc on these guys. Eventually, either getting a passed pawn or clearing up all the hindrances here, bringing your king back, and then promoting these 2 pawns. Completely winning position. You don't even have to struggle. And the reason I bring this up is as the game continues, okay, I have to slowly do this. My PC cannot handle when the engine is on, but I want you guys to see the eval. The reason I bring this whole point up is in this position after takes, like I said, for example, if the king comes in here, if it could come in here, it could never take this pawn because it just promotes, right? That's after you've traded off these guys. Here we have bishop takes and the king comes in here. The opponent moves the king up there, and here you can just simply play rook takes. Like there's no need to waste your time here. You just simply play rook takes here, and you are Gucci, right? Again, let's just give my opponent the benefit of the doubt. Let's just say that we don't have these 2 pawns. He can never take this, right? He can never take this, right? Because now you will never catch up with the pawn. Now you just never catch up with the pawn. I mean, this is just a dominant position, and I mean, he did extremely well. So yeah, another good game by Wolfe. And now we are going to like take a look at the game that ultimately made him lose. And this was because his opponent took advantage of Wolfe playing ultimate uber active. Like again, him playing like this just completely caught me off guard. I completely thought he'd be a player like me, positional, like taking your time. But he's very forward thinking. I don't know if that's how all beginners are. I don't think I was that kind of a beginner. But yeah, that's ultimately what caused his demise. But let's look at it and see what happened here. So here is Wolfe's game against Sapnap. I think he defeated him in the group stages, but here he lost to him in the blitz portion because the opponent played a tricky opening that if you haven't learned, you just get spanked by. So I mean, it's normal. I think it's good on Sapnap that he actually did that, because yeah, he just got your opponent off guard, right? So his opponent plays e4 and he plays e5, right? We have bishop to c4, we have bishop to c5. Knight to f3, d6. All these moves are good practical moves. Castles kingside, knight to c3, knight to c3, knight to f6, knight to c3. Castles kingside, then we have d3. Mostly when you see d3, you want to play h6 to prevent the pin, which is a very common like idea that is played in these Italian type games. Bishop with knight c6 to knight d4. This idea is much better suited for white And mostly when white wants to be tricky with it, they play the knight first before they get the bishop in. It's a very interesting position, right? Sorry, they play the knight in first before they play the bishop, right? So by this time, if you haven't played this and they come in here, when you play h6, they just take. Let me just show it like physically on the board. Let me just do this. And let's say we have this move and you don't respond to it and you have something like this. I can play this move, and normally this is what you use to sack the bishop. But now we just simply can take, and you would have to resort to this, just so you get a picture of what I'm saying. So this is normally how it's done, right? We have knight to c6, then we have bishop to g3. h6 ultimately comes in, and we have the trade. And all this is cool. All this is cool. You could, I mean, preempt the whole thing by playing c6 here. Again, all this comes with experience, so I don't blame people for missing these types of things, right? Knowing that this is where the knight wants to come in, you do sometimes want to play this move. Then you get these like ideas in the way. So, I mean, completely fine. So here we have h6, bishop takes, and now the knight jumps in, right? Attacking the queen. And I'm taking my time here because this is where Wolfe ultimately made his mistake. This is where Wolfe ultimately made his mistake. When the knight comes in here, you always have to ask yourself, like, what is this guy targeting? The instinct or the panic decision is, he's attacking my queen, I have to evade it. And when you think that kind of way in chess, it's just going to be, I'm under attack, I have to move. Right? And when you are forward thinking only, that is usually going to be the issue. But when you take a look at the position very carefully, you will notice that there's something else hanging in the balance. And that's this pawn. So the best move or the best response here is to go queen to d8. But he's never actually made a backward move. I mean, ultimately, his move is not completely bad, but it just allows the opponent a little bit problems, right? And now we get queen g6. Now, this move doesn't lose the game immediately, but you should always be aware of this. Always be aware of your opponent's options, right? When your opponent has an idea like this and you notice it, sometimes the best course of action is to neutralize it immediately. Right? Don't be like, oh, my knight is defending it, when it's a dire situation like this, right? The wrong response is to be like, oh, my knight is defending it. The knight is a very volatile piece, so you have to be very, very, very aware of this, right? So if your opponent realizes it, and ultimately what I see is that Wolfe probably didn't see it, right? He probably didn't see the idea, is what I'm saying, that the knight is actually here or something like that. Because here his opponent plays bishop to b5. And if you were to ask yourself, why bishop to b5? Why suddenly shifting? Because the bishop is very good on this square, right? It pins the pawn, and there are some very nice attacks you can make with this. So why suddenly would my opponent do this, right? Why would he suddenly just make this move? And it has to be something about the knight. That's kind of how you have to think about it. Why is he suddenly targeting my knight? Then you have to ask yourself, what is my knight doing? What is my knight doing so well that my opponent is now shifting his attention to my knight? Don't just assume that it's a wasted move, or don't just assume that your opponent is lower rated or something. You have to ask yourself these questions. And once you notice this square, you are like, aha, right? Because now, yes, this happens, but it's better than what could have happened, right? So that's basically the point I'm trying to make here. Okay, so here Wolfe misses the opportunity to make a very good move. He sees the pin, and again, this is the problem most chess players face: linear thinking. When you play an idea that works, you just automate that idea every single time, and it's like sometimes you ignore that your opponent has plans against it, right? The only reason you would want to play this move is because you have the idea of knight coming in here, PP on the PP, putting pressure on the pin piece. So that's why you'd want to do that. But I mean, here you miss the fact that your opponent can just ultimately take. So slightly better would be bishop to h3, right? Threatening checkmate. Obviously, if your opponent plays pawn push, this is glorious. So there are many ways your opponent can defend. one is like knight to e1, and the other way is knight to h4, which, I mean, you respond in this way. If your opponent comes in this way, there's no big deal. You attack the queen comes in this way. And where is my move? You jump knight in, you target the bishop, right? The bishop is hanging, so you target the bishop. And more than that, the smile on your face, you return the favor, right? you just absolutely return the favor to your opponent, right? So these are some of the things that could have occurred in this position. But ultimately, this isn't exactly what happened. We had bishop takes, the rook comes in. Again, this is why I believe he missed the whole idea, because you would have played this if you saw this. Okay, no, he did see it. Sorry, after the king move, he did see it. Sorry about that. But yeah, we eventually get this move. And this is what we call an intermezzo move, and it's something you should be very careful about. Intermezzo moves are intermezzo tactics are like very useful, but are very risky, because the point of an intermezzo is your opponent is making a very like respectable threat, like a very good threat, but rather than responding to that threat immediately, you are like, no, I'll do something else which may be of a higher threat to you. That way you can't like cash in on your threat. But the problem of intermezzo moves is that if your opponent can counter threat your threat, then the initial threat then becomes like confirmed. That's so many that's so many ways, but let me put in perspective here, right? This is the main threat, right? The pawn is attacking the bishop. Pawn is worth 1, bishop is worth 3. You want to respond to this move immediately if possible, right? Because you don't want to lose this trade. But then you create a counter threat which is of a higher importance than your threat, which is what Wolfe does here. If you take my pawn, if you take my bishop, then I just checkmate you, right? So my counter threat is a mate. So you have to respond to my counter threat before you can do something about your threat. But if your opponent can create another threat that is stronger than your threat, then the original threat becomes an issue. And that is why knight to h4 is very strong, because now if queen goes into g5, you can lose this guy, right? And ultimately, that is what ended up happening in the game. Actually, no. Whoa, did I miss something? I did miss something. I mean, ultimately, yeah, we do get this position where he loses, where he goes down a piece, and he like struggles to crawl back the position. He ends up making some slight errors here. He did like have a way or ways and means of bouncing back in the game, but with like a very bad pawn structure like this and with one less piece than your opponent, it's not that easy like of an idea to do. He continues to like blunder, and eventually it like ends up biting him in the face. What did I say? Slapping him in the face. And yeah, I mean, I'm just skipping all here. This is checkmate, and Sapnap wins the game. So yeah, very interesting to see Wolfe. Maybe, I mean, if there's any chess player, sorry, if there's any Pokemon player who ever watches this video, if Wolfe is actually an aggressive player, you can let me know, because in my mind he's more like a positional, he'll do more positional calculating, right? But seeing him play in this style was very like shocking. But I mean, ultimately, it was cool to see him play. I was very happy. Like, I was very excited, like, to see him play. So, guys, if you did enjoy this video, remember to like, comment, or subscribe. It really does help me out. I'm going to try and do more analysis videos. Analysis videos are very some way for me. I always have problems when I want to do them. But, I mean, we've got this one down. If Wolfie, you see this, if you skip to this part of the video and you see this, I love your videos, man. Hope to see more from you. I'm actually still like waiting for your win against, I've got his name, Dylan, right? I'm waiting for that video. I just can't wait to see the whole thought process. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. Next week, like I said, is the AICC. It begins 14th of May. I'll be covering it live, so you can subscribe, you can like, you can leave a comment, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Have a great rest of your day. Peace.